Hello. We're picking up here with chapter 2, the end of section 2. I'm sorry that I haven't got this to you earlier, but wanted to pass this on. So we're picking up with the starving time. So this is a time in Jamestown when many people, 90% of the people died. They were facing horrific conditions, disease, starvation, threats of Indian attacks, and so they had to take desperate measures to survive, and that included survival cannibalism. So after they ate the horses, all the farm animals, the dogs and cats, rats, whatever they could find, chewed on shoe leather, there has been evidence that there was some cannibalism after people died, that people chose to eat the people to survive. A very unfortunate, sad time in their history. But so of the original 400 that had come over the years, only 60 are going to survive this time. I'm going to skip those two individuals and go on to John Rolfe. So you can just skip those in your notes. But John Rolfe brings tobacco seeds after this starving time and helps to bring prosperity to Jamestown. It becomes America's first cash crop, so it's going to bring in money in great numbers. So we have 40,000 pounds being produced in 1619, and then later on, less than 2 decades later, or about a decade later, we've got 1.5 million pounds being produced. So this is something that was in high demand, makes a lot of money for the colonists, but leads into the plantation agriculture and later the use of slaves. Now, in 1619, it was a bang-up year for the colonies. Sorry about that. In that a lot of changes took place to improve Jamestown. So martial law is lifted. They lessened a lot of the restrictions that had been on people, making it more appealing for independence and having more rights. And so more people are going to come to the colonies after the martial law is lifted. Also, we have the formation of the House of Burgesses. This was a time where we see colonists getting more rights. They're electing representatives to govern them, and it was the first of its kind here to actually have people electing officials to represent them. We also have the arrival of the first African slaves. First, they're going to be treated like indentured servants. So 19 of them arrived on a Dutch ship in 1619. They'll be treated as indentured servants first, so they'll work off their contract with the person who paid for their passage, and then they got some of their own land. But later we see the distinction being made between indentured servants and slaves based on the color of their skin. So it starts the dark history of slavery in America. The final thing is the arrival of eligible wives. So 90 women had agreed to come from England to be wives. So you could purchase, kind of the mail order bride system, purchase a wife for 125 pounds of tobacco. Since tobacco was a form of currency at the time, that's what was required to get a wife. So these arriving were probably the first of some others that will come to help set deeper roots in the colony. Now we also want to finish up by looking at the types of colonies. There was charter colonies. These are governed by a trade group authorized by the king, and so they become the most independent. So as we work from charter to proprietary to royal colonies, we're going from most independent to least independent. Proprietary colonies is where the king appointed the proprietor to govern the colony, and then they were accountable back to the king. So they were often given a grant of land. The king would check up in on them. Every once in a while, they had to make reports back to them, but they're not required to do just exactly what the king said. That's what happens with the royal colony. This is where they're controlled directly by the crown. The king and his counselors have directly appointed someone. That's their yes man who will follow their lead. They really don't think without asking the king for permission, and so they are most closely tied to the king, while others were far more independent. So we'll look at those type of colonies and how they were set up. Many of these colonies were started as charter colonies and then later became royal colonies as the king wanted tighter control on them. All right, at this point we're going to continue and see if we can get through about the New England colonies, so it's all here together. We're looking at Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire as part of the New England colonies. So starting with that, we have the religious situation in England is that they had moved from the Catholic Church to the Church of England, a Protestant church, but there were still many things that made it seem very much like the Catholic Church. And so they're challenged in the colonies to, or challenging in England that some people wanted to go away from the Catholic ways and to be more closely tied to the Protestant Reformation. And so that's what many of these groups sought to do. So the first group is the Pilgrims, or also called the Separatists. They had separated from the Church of England because they wanted to serve and worship God without interference from other churches. They wanted to clean up the church on their own, but they needed to be independent to do that. So they will come on the Mayflower in 1620. So 41 of the 101 on board were these separatist pilgrims. The other remaining were coming for more economic reasons. They were merchants, craftsmen, indentured servants, and similar groups that are seeking a new future. So they share passage together on the Mayflower after the separatists had acquired passage on this ship. So they will make their way under the leadership of William Bradford, who sought to be a shining example in the New World. They had headed to an area that was supposed to be north of Jamestown, but they're blown off course and end up in Massachusetts. So when they arrive in November, things are already in winter conditions and frozen, and it's not going to allow them to grow much food supply. So they're really going to suffer in this first winter. But as they come into port, they realize that they've been blown off course and they don't have any right. They're basically trespassers on this land. And so they had to put it together a form of government because there's already grumblings among the people of how they're going to run this government if they don't have a document in place to lead them. So they put together the Mayflower Compact. They agreed to submit to the leadership and majority of the community and to call their colony Plymouth. That had been the port they had sailed from in England. So they're seeking to kind of recreate their home here. That is the first document of self-government. And so the text of that talks about giving honor to the king, honor to God, but setting up the rules and laws that they needed to have in place to govern themselves. Now, after they get on shore, half of the settlers will die during that first winter as they struggle. They will receive some aid from Squanto and Samoset, who were Native Americans who had had contact with the English, and then for various reasons had offered their aid to the Pilgrims and helped them get food. Now, Plymouth will operate as its own colony until 1691, when it joins with all the other settlements and towns to become just Massachusetts as its own colony. Now, the other part of Massachusetts that we'll look at was the Puritans. The Puritans are coming in a larger group. They bring 17 ships instead of one and 1,000 people, and they come to an area that will be called the Massachusetts Bay Colony. It will have towns like Boston and Salem within that region. Now, they're very well organized and financed, and they were part of the Great Migration. The Great Migration was a time in the decade of the 1630s when 50,000 English residents left the country and went to various colonies within current-day United States and the island nations of the West Indies to settle. So it was a major movement of people to the colonies that starts to help build the foundation for the area. They're led by John Winthrop, who's also wanting this group to be a city on a hill, to stand out to others, be a light that people could look to. They established Harvard College to train men for ministry, and it had served that purpose for many years to train ministers for that region. Now, the side note of this is the Puritans, unfortunately, see their focus on faith diminishing and being replaced by a focus on economics. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but there was a great focus on making money over religion, and that was an unfortunate side effect of their prosperity within the colonies. The next colony we'll look at is Connecticut. Connecticut was founded by Thomas Hooker and some congregations as they left Massachusetts and then came to settle in Connecticut. They established the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, so that's the first constitution, and that had a representative self-government. So that led to more democracy, democratic views in Connecticut over Massachusetts because they did not require church membership to vote, which was a big step over what had been allowed in Massachusetts. So they're going to join under a royal charter to get protection from the Native Americans. They had seen a situation where 9 colonists were killed by Native Americans, they believed, and so the Connecticut men went and burned the village and killed 400 Native Americans, men, women, and children in retaliation. The next colony is Rhode Island. It's founded in part by Roger Williams, who left the settlement in Massachusetts because he was advocating for the complete separation of church and state. He felt it was important that we recognize all beliefs and that the government not have any role in religion or religion have any role in government. So that's ideas that we also see today. The next individual is Anne Hutchinson. She was banished from Massachusetts because of her beliefs that you don't have to follow Scripture or really focus on Scripture to have a relationship with God. She believes that she had direct revelations from God that were higher than the Bible, and people should listen to her more than the Bible, God's true word. And so she was banished from Massachusetts and goes on to help establish parts in Rhode Island, kind of bumps around to different settlements until she and her children were killed by Indians in an attack. Our final colony is New Hampshire. This was founded by Anne Hutchinson's brother-in-law. And New Hampshire will not be its own colony until 1679, when at that time it was still under Massachusetts control up to that point. So we have starting to build out the different regions of our colonies. So we want to think about, why did they come to New England? As we talked about in section 1, we looked at all of the different reasons that they came: riches, the opportunity to own land, religious freedom, political freedom, and adventure. And so we're trying to take each region and look at why those specific colonists came. So as we evaluated it in class, we came upon that maybe people came to Massachusetts Bay for riches, and religious freedom would apply to all of these colonies, but Massachusetts, dividing out to Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, all of those were focused on religious freedom. Political freedom, as we see the Mayflower Compact in Plymouth, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut in the colony of Connecticut, both of those focused on getting religious freedom. So as we go through each of the other regions of the colonies, we'll identify colonies that go with this, so we can use it for our essay on our test to focus on those 5 reasons that they came, and then also an example of a colony that came for that reason. So we have posted a few assignments talking about the quizzes online, and a reading assignment. So please check your to-do list on that. It can be submitted online to me, or take a picture of it on paper, depending on how you want to do it. I'll also mention that in the email as I send this link. So please let me know if you have any questions, anything I can help with. Have a great weekend.